former congressional candidate, Annabelle Robertson, from female and have run for public office. It's not going to be that unusual or bizarre for you. Am I correct?
Yeah, I certainly can't speak to other women and their experiences, but we all feel like our experience is unique. But I think certainly mine was very bothersome in terms of what I think it means for women overall and the sexism that I experienced from my Democratic opponent on the campaign trail.
Since we know politics is never about sportsmanlike behavior, it's more like the 16th century school of roaring, which is the art of fighting unfairly. How were you demeaned, trashed, and otherwise devalued, both as a woman and as a candidate by your opponent in the Democratic primary?
Well, the first thing that happened was that the day that I filed for the election, even though my opponent had been running for since I guess last summer, summer 2017, and I had announced in December, the day that I filed, there were fake social media accounts that were set up, and the picture that was used in both cases of the two social media accounts was a picture of a Barbie doll, a blonde Barbie doll with blue around, and calling me a grifter. I'm not really sure why, and also outing me as a so-called fake Dem, claiming that I was a Republican running as a Democrat. Hard to find an answer to that one, isn't it?
It's the grifting thing that's interesting, since...
Grifting, yes, I was a grifter.
Well, of course, that's because, of course, when you're asking for money,
I guess.
To help support you. But how did that affect your social media presence while running? We know they were troll accounts.
Well, yeah, they weren't troll accounts. They were actually set up by an operative being...
they were troll accounts.
Yes, in that regard, yes, they definitely were. But I think the thing that began to be really disturbing was when they approached my ex-husband and had him post a statement denying the fact that he had abused me. One of the platforms of my campaign was that I am a domestic violence survivor. And that had not been something that I had widely publicly disclosed, but everyone who knows me knows that was the case. And so they began posting medical records from him, redacted medical records, tax returns, family court documents, and statements from him claiming that I was lying. I'm not really sure if there are many abusers out there who openly admit that they did do that, even when they're in jail. But and even claim
always innocent.
They're always innocent. I think everyone in jail is innocent, right?
I mean, I didn't hit her. She repeatedly walked into my fist.
That's exactly right. And in my case, apparently, I walked into a flying table, coffee table. So and then he absurdly even claimed that they began promoting that I had abused him.
That's another thing that's usually typical as well, when abusers claim, so you file a charge against them because it's...
That's right. And so what was bothersome to me was that even though I had been, there was some truth to the fact that I had been a Republican in the past. I had identified as a Republican, and they had found a quote where I was trying to persuade someone to vote for Hillary Clinton as opposed to Trump, and had described myself to her. I said, look, you know me as a lifelong Republican. This was someone that I was engaging in short speak with, who knew me in the past. I wasn't giving a disclaimer under oath as to which day that happened. I voted for President Obama both times, and I'm proud of it, and even voted Democrat.
So you're actually a rhino.
I think that was the claim. Although the irony was that in South Carolina, if I really was a Republican instead of someone running on a very bold progressive platform, if I wanted to get elected, I would have run as a Republican and probably could have beat Joe Wilson in the primary as a Republican woman. But that's just not who I am. I am a bold progressive, and I was running on a very bold progressive platform. And I'm also one of these women who kind of, stands a little bit too tall and speaks a little too loud. I'm educated, I'm smart, and I'm a survivor. I've had to raise 2 girls on my own, and like so many women around this country, I know what it's like to struggle.
Well, the question is, with the medical records, were they your medical records?
They were actually his medical records that were made to look as if they were mine. So it was very disturbing.
Well, then you should have done sued him for the HIPAA violations.
Well, uncovering anonymous Twitter accounts is difficult. So that's, and Facebook accounts, that was the challenge, and they knew that. And of course, those documents did, however, get widely circulated, and my opponent himself actually did make some of those claims publicly. And so, let's just say that he and I will meet again. That's funny. The evil laugh.
Well, we were doing a little introductory chat. You were telling me how one of the organizations that's here came to your defense because because what was being done to you as far as smearing you goes was so outrageous. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't just the fake Twitter account posting records. It was also his field director filed. My opponent's field director filed a bogus claim with the South Carolina Ethics Commission. She first tried to do it by getting us kicked off the State House grounds at the March for Our Lives, where my daughter, who's 15, was speaking.
What was the reasoning for getting you kicked off of the State House?
She claimed that we were campaigning. We were wearing my campaign T-shirts, and of course, we were there with a table with my with the organization's permission and full knowledge, and we were wearing campaign T-shirts. And I politely explained to her that there's this thing called the First Amendment, and that
she thought you couldn't be politicking on the State House.
Well, she just thought we could, and it is true you're not allowed to actually campaign on the South Carolina State House grounds, but we were there just wearing our T-shirts. So simply, we didn't have any materials. We weren't handing them out, and T-shirts are speech, and they're freedom speech. So that didn't work. The police told her they called the organization. They confirmed that we were there, and there was no issue with us wearing the shirts. That didn't work. She filed a complaint with the South Carolina Ethics Commission. Interestingly enough, my ex-husband on or about the same day filed some kind of very bogus complaint as well. So they were apparently working together.
Coordinated, yeah.
And something completely bizarre and unrelated to this. And then she also filed his field director bar exam, South Carolina bar. I'm an attorney. Licensed in both California and South Carolina, so she filed a bar complaint in South Carolina that was kicked out without even any response, as was the ethics issue. So there were police reports that were filed against. She claimed that she had a restraining order against my FEC treasurer.
Those are crimes.
Well, she held it up, and my FEC treasurer was asked to leave an Indivisible meeting by her holding up a little green delivery slip. I guess the Indivisible organizer didn't maybe think that a person would not self-deliver via U.S. postal mail a restraining order. That would happen in a courtroom and would be issued. Process server, and probably my opponent would have been there actually, because that's a due process issue, which I know a little about, having done some civil rights.
So have you done anything about filing complaints regarding the filing of false police reports? Because that's a crime.
Well, yeah, it is. And they also made allegations, others online, that were problematic in terms of the law. And we are definitely looking into this. So we have some ways of moving forward.
You were intimidatable.
We took it as a gift in a way, as strange as that might seem. Outing me as a so-called former Republican actually garnered me a number of votes. I am of the position that a centrist Democrat is going to struggle, especially if that centrist Democrat is a white male. I think that is something that we love to nominate in red states as, this is what we've always done. But, we've always done it and we've always lost.
And then they always flip out when somebody also changes a position. Like, you are not allowed to evolve your your thought processes. Like,
well, thank you, and that's exactly right. I think some of the things that I had written years ago reflected
where you were at
where
that
I
time.
was at that time, 14, 15, 18 years ago, and people evolve, people change. Even President Obama didn't support gay marriage until or marriage equality, I should say, until 2015, and
they tried to use the fact they didn't support it against him as like you're just doing this because, and sadly, what I have found is that it's not just in the right wing, but there's a lot of even so-called progressives that are still of the opinion you cannot grow grow as a human being in your thought processes.
Right.
That once you are here, you have to remain here.
Well, what I was explaining, when I was, people who were Democrats there, a couple of them said to me, well, we were just so disappointed to hear that you used to be a Republican. And I was flabbergasted by that. I said, but why? Well, you didn't tell us. And I said, I didn't know. I need to tell you that 15 years ago I was a Republican.
Why does it matter now?
And what someone told me was this: there is apparently a deep pride for a lot of people in saying I'm a lifelong Democrat. So those those words that I had used as a lifelong Republican, quote unquote, kind of triggered some people and made them think that meant up until the date, and which was still, by the way, 2015, I believe, when the quote was, maybe 2016. But regardless, that's my voting, again, going back to the issue of the sexism, my voting record was very clear, and I offered to provide that to the media to show that I had been a member of the Democratic Party in California when I lived there, and they didn't want to see it. My opponent, however, never was asked to show his record, and when we finally pulled the record, it showed that he had never voted at all in his life until November 2016, not even in a Democratic primary. He's tried to cover that up by saying, I voted absentee, as if somehow absentee votes aren't registered.
That would still show up
Of
as
course
voting.
it would. It shows when you voted absentee. So that was part of the sexism. They attacked my law degrees. I happen to have 3 law degrees. I moved to Europe when I was 18. They called me an immigrant. My campaign laughed, and they said, hey, congratulations, they're calling you an immigrant. You've reached Obama status now,
But you see, you still can run for office for that. You can run for any, as an immigrant, the only office you can't run for is president.
Right. And here is the thing that is just so crazy is it's just that double standard.
Yeah.
Is it I was being asked, why didn't you, I was asked for my academic records. He was never challenged. He's actually does not have a college degree, and that's fine. There's a lot of skilled trades, but he was an Army recruiter, and that's fine. And perfectly respectable to be in the military for 28 years. I respect our military. My daddy was a Marine. My father-in-law was a Marine. My brother served for 20-something years. My uncle was in Vietnam. So, I have a lot of respect. And I was married to a military man. Yeah. But, I think that what we have to look at is there are qualifications for certain legislative positions. And I would think that Congress would perhaps be one of the most exacting. And we need either someone, I think we need to elect people who have policy experience or people who have very specific industry or credentials where they understand the way laws work. Because the reality is reading and interpreting and drafting federal law is a very complicated process. And that's not something that just Joe Schmo from, the average guy can do. It's something that I've had to learn over the years and hone. And I think that even still, I know I'll have to rely on mentors to work me through it, but to go in without any level of training or experience in that at all. And the other thing that I think was a double standard was I am from the South, and I'm a Carolina girl. I was a USC grad, and my opponent has just moved there in recent years.
Carpetbagger.
Well, I don't, let me tell you what, I don't use that term, and let me tell you why. Most people don't know that. But do you know that term was a derogatory term after the Civil War?
Yes, I do, because it referred to people from the North coming in.
Yeah, but they were the ones who were investing in African-owned businesses, African-American-owned businesses.
And they were also the ones that decided that they were also the ones that decided the one-drop rule, because the American composer, Louis Moreau Gottschalk, his father was German, his mother was Haitian. Prior to Reconstruction, he was, if you take a look at his picture, his history, you would not consider him black. Mm-hmm. After the Civil War, he became black.
Interesting, yeah. The one-quarter Jim Crow type stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was the Northern Reconstructionists that decided that.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, they were the ones that made that distinction.
Oh, I did not realize that. I thought that was a Southern
because up until that point, because the Creole the Creole class in Louisiana was they ranked all the way up from the lower classes all the way into the the aristocratic.
Interesting.
Because they had that because the French did not consider them black. And also, it was the post-Reconstruction that you have this divide between the Catholicism of Louisiana of New Orleans and the Protestantism of the rest of Louisiana.
Okay. Well, I try not to use that term regardless, just simply because I want to, he was new to the South, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we have a lot of people coming in, but I feel like when you are representing a district, I think our best leaders are going to come from our community, people who've lived there. And I've been involved in race relations since the 90s, regardless of my what lever pulling I was doing at the time. Yeah. I always identified as a social liberal, was involved in race relations in the 90s and feeding hungry children there, who I'm still in touch with. And, for me...
Oh, a real conservative.
That's right.
Not what it means today, which is for myself and only myself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I had a lot of hungry kids that would gather on my door because we were living in an all-black neighborhood in Decatur, Georgia, outside Atlanta, and ended up, how could you not feed them? I started with cookies and milk, and then I realized they were hungry, and I started feeding them every day and began mentoring them for a couple of years, and then I went to work for the first female black-owned newspaper in the country, and so, had 10 years of journalism in between my two legal careers, and I think that was also something, again, that was used to smear me. It was, how can a woman be so accomplished? How can a woman, what do you mean you have 3 law degrees? What do you mean you were a journalist? You must be lying. But we all know as women,
affirmative action, title, you were given these things because you're a woman.
Or then there's that. If you did get them, then you got them because of that, right? And so, once again, our accomplishments.
Thing, you only accomplished it because you did.
That's right. Even the accomplishments are used against you. That you must be lying, but if you do have them, then
you must have slept with somebody to get them.
Well, that's right. They didn't quite go that far, but that I'm sure. We even said early on. I said, watch. The next step will be they will say that I'm lying about my abuse, and sure enough, that within weeks, that's what happened. So I think the big takeaway is twofold. One is that we are still engaged in a power struggle as women. This was not over in the 60s or 70s or with the Me Too movement. This is simply a backlash from the Me Too movement so the second thing is, so we still have to fight those power structures and what men will do to hang on to them. Yeah. They're willing to go to any lengths, even really unlawful activity, even a congressional candidate, even if he's, doing it a little bit over here to the left or the right and trying to disclaim that it's him. At one point, my opponent actually went online and made some very defamatory statements, and he also made defamatory statements to the radio. He got to the media. He got bolder and bolder as we got closer, and after I beat him in the primary, that's when the really bold stuff happened directly from him. And those are suable actions, and so it showed me what men are willing to do to hang on to the power structure. The second thing was that he had about 5 to 8 women, maybe 10 women at the most, who were amplifying that. So I think once again the myth is that just as with racism, it doesn't matter who you are, what your skin color is, you can still be just as much of a racist, or you can still be propagating that racism. Misogyny is the same way, and women who are misogynists are actually some of the most vicious. My daughter has lost one of her friends because her mother chose, who I've never met at all in person, chose to engage in some of that. Now, she's a Republican, but most of this was done by Democratic women on the left who had hair trigger reactions, in particular to supposedly me running as a quote-unquote fake Dem. Again, why I wouldn't run as a Republican in South Carolina if I was one, I don't know. Why do the other side?
I think it was probably more because you were like a Democrat in California.
I don't even know where that was, but again, it was just something they were using against me. It really was not. I even tried to reason with someone, and this person was out of the district, a young female woman, and she wrote a letter to the editor, which unfortunately comes up in Google searches, and I, really just very vicious and cruel, and she was working for another very progressive candidate. And so those are, to me, the two takeaways. But the third one, which is, I think, perhaps even bigger, is that it is easy to discount what Donald Trump has done in terms of unleashing division between the left and the right as limiting that division to the left and the right. That's not true.
It just unleashed it across the board.
He did unleash it across the board. And just as men feel free now to act more racist. They also feel free now to act more misogynistic. And in my case, these were men who identify as Democrats. One of his big operatives is a former progressive and even a former candidate for office and a big office. And that person identifies as a progressive. And I think, and he has a reputation as a big misogynist. But, for that to be openly done and coming after a female candidate, especially when my opponent shook my hand and promised to engage in no mudslinging. So that's the third thing that is really the biggest. And then the fourth takeaway that I have is I just finished here today training with Vote, Run, Lead. Yeah. And one of the things I learned there is when women are attacked, we have a choice. Do we stand up or do we stay quiet? And one of the things we learned is that if we stand up for ourselves, it actually decreases response and decreases our popularity. Women don't like to see other women standing up for themselves and other men. What they do like is if we have the mother bear that comes out, and we come out in response to that how dare anyone attack a victim of domestic violence. South Carolina is second in the nation with domestic violence, and Joe Wilson, our Republican congressman, refused to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. That's the bigger issue, and that's what some women did for me. Thankfully, you mentioned that earlier, touched on it. The Working Families Party of South Carolina came out and denounced my opponent by name, along with 12 leading progressive women from the major organizations across the state, including the AFL-CIO, the Brady Campaign, ERA, and many, many others, the Harriet Hancock LGBTQ Center, a very progressive group there. Harriet Hancock herself signed the statement along with these other women. And those women...
Was that in your defense?
They did not mention my name because they did not want it to be an endorsement per se.
Right. Yeah,
they wanted it to be about the sexist smear campaign.
But it was still coming to your defense without naming.
Yes, and if you go to the South Carolina Working Families Party Facebook page, you can scroll down and you'll see the statement and the petition that they issued with change.org. And also, I guess it would be on change.org, SC Working Families Party. And they basically stated that in all of their years of politics, even though they too had been the victim of smear campaigns and misogynistic comments, even on the left, that none of them in all of their years of politics had ever seen a campaign so sexist as this one. And they named the Sean Kerrigan for Congress campaign. Yeah. And it really meant a lot to me, just as all of us. We need other people who see it. And I didn't honestly understand until my fellow women and mentors pointed out to me, yes, of course this is misogyny. It's not just a vicious, brutal, personal attack on you and your daughters. It's misogyny because they're not demanding the same thing from him. And the voters weren't demanding the same thing of him. And the women weren't demanding the same thing of him. And no one was speaking up for us except these women. And so I think that's the big takeaway is, one, if we're going to run for office, we need to expect this. We need to look at everything we have in our past, and we need to basically, unfortunately, as my black friends have said to me, we have to do everything twice as good to be considered
backwards and
in high heels. That's right. They have to do that, and so I think as women, we still have to do that as well. Yeah. But I think also we need to be willing to step up for other people, just as we're learning at organizations like these and all of our organizations. Yeah. When we see someone being abused, it's important for us to step up and take the hit. Either with them or for them. Yeah. And that's what these women did for me, and I'm grateful. I did lose the runoff by 700 points, but I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of people asking me to run again. Awesome. I'm trying to teach my two daughters the issue of perseverance and standing up for themselves and standing up for other people, more importantly. Yeah. And who knows? Maybe I'll have another opportunity again.
Most likely, yes. I want to say thank you for speaking with me. I know you have somewhere else to be speaking to, because I remember your wrangler was going.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So if people want more information about Annabelle, you can go to her website, which is Annabelle, ANNABELLE 2018.com.
Annabelle2018.com. Yep. And I also have a Facebook page, Annabelle4, the numeral 4SC. And I follow me on Twitter at Annabelle4SC as well.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Annabelle.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it, Kelly.
My pleasure.
All right.